We have a very diverse stormwater system. It's composed of gray infrastructure, green infrastructure, including both natural waterways and low-impact development features. We have quite a large scale of our very interconnected system, and obviously all of this requires maintenance. Now, like other municipalities, we have a variety of different responsibilities when it comes to stormwater management. We deal in flood management. We also deal with different operational and maintenance pressures. We have a storm sewer bylaw regarding spills that we enforce. We investigate spills as well, so we also deal with water quality. Our infrastructure is aging, and so we have new infrastructure projects that we are putting into the ground. And also, like many other growing municipalities, we have increasing amounts of hard surface that creates more runoff and places more pressure on our stormwater system, requiring new projects. And finally, we also know that we are experiencing and can expect increasingly extreme weather and storm events. So this is something that we also have to prepare for in the future. So the introduction of our stormwater charge really brought about two major changes in how we fund our stormwater services. And the first is it increased investment significantly in our stormwater management program. Now, like other municipalities, previously our stormwater services were funded through property taxes. And like many other municipalities, we had to compete with a lot of other very important services when it came to funding. So we would typically be allocated anywhere from about $6 to $16 million a year for stormwater services from property taxes. In the first year of our stormwater charge, the amount of funding we received increased considerably. So it went from about $16 million or about $14 million in 2012 to about $32 million in 2016, which was the first year of our stormwater charge. And this year we are projected to bring in about $42 million in funding. So this really is transformative in how we are able to fund our stormwater services. Another major change is that by implementing the stormwater charge as a user fee, I created a more fair and a dedicated source of funding for our stormwater services. So previously, when we were funded through property taxes, the majority of properties in Mississauga are residential properties, and so these funded the majority of our property taxes. However, when it comes to hard surface, the minority of properties in Mississauga are non-residential properties, so industrial, commercial, institutional, or multi-residential like condo properties. They're the minority of properties, but they actually contribute the majority of hard surface in the city. So we have really sort of switched around, maybe not completely reversed, but definitely reallocated who is funding the majority of our stormwater services based on the amount of pressure that different types of properties place on our stormwater system. Furthermore, this is a dedicated fund, so it can only be used for stormwater management and for managing the stormwater charge itself. So we're able to have a sustainable source of funding that we can depend on and can bank on the amount that we expect to receive in coming years and can plan projects accordingly. Now, the process that we used for Mississauga and our approach. Now, I'll say, while I wish we could take credit, we are definitely far behind many other municipalities when it comes to implementing a stormwater charge or user fee. Stormwater charges are much more common in the United States, where well over 1,500 municipalities have them. In Ontario, there are many other municipalities that are increasingly adopting them, and I believe there are just over about 24 municipalities in Canada that have stormwater charges. So this is an emerging trend, very well developed in the U.S. And starting to take hold here in Canada. And the way that stormwater charges range in structure can really go all the way from a flat fee for every property, which some might argue isn't really so much of a user fee, to a bit of a tiered system. So different types of properties, residential versus industrial, might have a different flat fee, all the way to very personalized individual assessments where all the hard surface on every property is individually mapped out. And obviously, as you can imagine, as you move along this spectrum, the amount of fairness in assessing a stormwater charge increases, but so do the administration costs and efforts as well. Now, our path towards a stormwater charge took about 5 years. And I won't go through all the different steps. I'm happy to talk about those in more detail. But what I want you to sort of take away from this is that through every step, the stormwater charge could have very easily been derailed. It could have been decided by council that they didn't want to pursue the charge any further. And indeed, there are many municipalities that have embarked on this path, and that where their council has decided that perhaps this is not the best option for them prior to implementation. So a political champion is really critical as you are navigating this path. As part of that, there's also a really big role for providing information and education to both your mayor and council, but also to other decision makers within the city as well, so that they are well and can be, or are aware and can be well versed in the rationale for a stormwater user fee. Now, our stormwater charge is actually pretty simple in how it's assessed. Every property in Mississauga is assessed for the amount of hard surface that's on the property or that we expect to be on the property. And we determine the number of billing units of hard surface for each of these properties. And for us, a billing unit is 267 square meters of hard surface, which is the average amount of hard surface on an average detached residential property in Mississauga. We multiply it by the stormwater rate for that year. In this year in 2018, it's $104 per billing unit, and you come up with your stormwater charge from there. So we assess our residential properties slightly differently from our non-residential and our multi-residential properties. Like I mentioned, residential properties are the majority of properties in Mississauga. We receive aerial imagery every year that's taken not just for stormwater charge purposes, but for other geomatics purposes. And residential properties prior to the stormwater charge already had their roof area mapped out for other city purposes. We did a study of our residential properties and found that there was actually an excellent correlation between total roof area on the property, so the house and any outbuildings, with total hard surface. So we use, because of these reasons, we use roof area as an indicator of total hard surface for residential properties. So based on the roof area, they're slotted into one of 5 tiers that run from 0.5 billion units, which would be an annual charge of $52 this year, all the way to 1.7 billion units where it caps out at the largest, and that's about $176 and change for the annual stormwater charge for the city. Now, for non-residential properties and multi-residential properties like condos and apartment buildings, this roof area to hard surface ratio didn't really hold up for us, so we map all of the hard surface on each of these properties. These are also, like I said, the minority of properties in Mississauga, but they have the majority of hard surface, so it's well worth the effort. And there is no cap, unlike the residential properties, there's no cap on the maximum stormwater charge for these properties. Now, the way the stormwater charge is billed, we are a lower tier municipality within the region of Peel. The region of Peel is responsible for water and wastewater service, and as such already had an existing water wastewater bill. So our stormwater charge appears as a separate line on the water wastewater bill that property owners receive from the region of Peel. Most of these are billed on a quarterly basis, with some high water users billed on a monthly basis. Some properties perhaps don't receive a wastewater bill, but might have a significant stormwater charge if you think of something like a parking lot. So for these properties, they receive what we call a stormwater-only bill, also from the region of Peel. And there is one stormwater charge and one bill for every property, even if there are multiple units on a property, the way you might find with a condominium. So in those cases, we rely on the property owners or the property managers to divide up the stormwater charge in accordance with any lease agreements or condo management agreements. Using an existing bill is definitely helpful when it comes to administrative efficiency. It's also something that residents and property owners recognize. But a big lesson learned from us, or for us, is that you do have to be prepared to work with a new system. The system that we use for data management had to learn, essentially we had to figure out how to make it speak efficiently to Region of Peel's data management and billing system. So this is something that you definitely want to think about and allocate time and resources for. Now, some other lessons that we've learned, you cannot under-communicate your stormwater charge. There will always be people, you could go to every door and there would still be people who ended up not hearing about it. So definitely err on the side of caution and extravagance, if you will, when it comes to communication. We used a variety of different means, ranging from putting ads in local newspapers. We sent out postcards to every resident in Mississauga. We put inserts into every water bill. As we developed the stormwater charge, we did have some public consultation workshops and also had stakeholder groups that we consulted with. When it comes to the charge, you want to be both widespread in your communications, but sometimes you will need to tailor some of them. So, for example, we had some tailored letters that we sent out just to condominiums to explain how billing would take place. We also wanted to be as transparent as possible when it came to what the stormwater charge would be for a property and to give property owners as much notice as possible. So we have an online stormwater charge estimator tool that anyone can go onto, and they can enter any address in Mississauga. You can enter your own, you can enter your neighbors, you can enter square ones, and you can see what the stormwater charge is for that property, and you can see what the imagery is and the hard surface that's mapped. And we wanted to do this in an effort to not just allow property owners to prepare, but to really emphasize that we are taking a transparent and fair approach. And these are messages that we consistently used and reiterated across all of our communication. Now, something that we realized as we began communicating our stormwater charge is that many people actually don't know much about stormwater management. There's still a lot of confusion about the difference between wastewater and stormwater, for example, and there was a really significant gap in public knowledge about what a stormwater system is, how it works, how properties are serviced by it. Never mind things like what kind of best practices you want property owners to adopt, what you want them to do or not do to help manage stormwater on their properties. So we found that implementing a stormwater charge highlighted this really incredible need to increase the stormwater literacy of our population, but it also created this wonderful opportunity because people suddenly were talking about stormwater management. And granted, not everybody was happy about the charge, but it did create this hook of attention that we were able to use to expand our outreach and education program when it came to stormwater management and trying to educate the public on what it is. So this is, I think ideally you would do this kind of education prior to implementing a charge, but even if you haven't had the chance to or the resources to, implementing a charge does create this wonderful opportunity that should be made use of. It's also important to consider how different properties will be treated. We are very, very consistent in our approach to mapping and assessing different properties, but at the same time there are some key characteristics that need to be accounted for at the policy level as you are developing a charge. So I mentioned that there are properties that are without water service, thinking about how you might bill those if you've decided to go with the water bill. It's also important to decide ahead of time how you will define hard surface. So, I think everybody agrees, pavement, asphalt, roof, these are all hard surface. We also define hard surface as including disturbed or compacted soil or gravel, as you might see in this property here. So this property that you can see an image of doesn't actually have any permanent hard surface or roof area on it, but almost the entire thing is considered to be hard surface for stormwater charge purposes. And that's because when you have sites like this where you have a lot of construction and disturbed compacted soil, you'll have a lot of runoff. So how you define hard surface is pretty important. There are some properties that cannot be charged or cannot have a fee or charge levied on them. So for example, we have what we call a legal exemption for properties like Metrolinks or Crown properties or school boards that cannot have charges and fees levied on them. Sometimes council wishes to provide relief to certain types of properties, not based necessarily on whether they manage stormwater or not, but sometimes for other purposes. So we have what we call subsidies for properties like places of worship or low-income seniors and persons with disabilities. Because this has nothing to do necessarily with stormwater management, but is for other purposes, these subsidies are actually paid out through property taxes rather than through our stormwater charge. And finally, you also need to have some kind of an appeal process if somebody doesn't agree with their charge. One of the wonderful things about implementing a user fee is that it also gives you the opportunity to incentivize low-impact development in different ways. So we have a credit program for multi-residential and non-residential properties. These properties can receive up to 50% credit on their stormwater charge, depending on what they've implemented. We decided to focus our credit program just on these multi-residential and non-residential properties, since again, they are the minority of properties, but they have the majority of hard surface in Mississauga, and they often already have some kind of stormwater management practices on their properties, whether that was a condition of development or whether they have done it for corporate social responsibility purposes. We wanted to acknowledge and reward these properties. We don't have a residential credit program. It was something that was examined very closely by staff. And the reason for that is that in other jurisdictions where they have stormwater charges and residential credit programs, these tend to be characterized by pretty low uptake and pretty high administration costs. What we did instead was to focus on more personalized residential support. So we had a one-year pilot program that was a stormwater home visit program. So at a property owner's request, a stormwater advisor would go to their home and would give them very personalized, tailored information on how stormwater flowed on their property and how they could help manage it, prevent flooding, and also help the environment as well. Now, I do think that probably one of our major lessons learned from implementing with the stormwater charge was that while perhaps a residential credit program might not work for all municipalities, there does need to be some sort of recognition program for properties that have done good when it comes to stormwater management. These don't necessarily have to be monetary. We found that for a lot of property owners, especially residential property owners that had perhaps installed rain barrels or sometimes had very impressive systems with permeable pavement driveways and rain gardens, that the amount that they would have saved on their stormwater charge wouldn't necessarily have been enough to spur someone to do all of this. But what they really need is the recognition that what they've done has helped their community and helped the natural environment around them. So these recognition programs don't necessarily have to be monetary, but you do need to implement them from very early on so it doesn't look like some sort of an afterthought that you tacked on. Now, continuing with our existing credit program, we've found it very beneficial to work with existing organizations and their programs to help support property owners in implementing best practices that could be worthy of credit. We receive a lot of phone calls from multi-residential and non-residential property owners who perhaps are interested in accessing the credit program, but don't really know that much about stormwater management and certainly not about low-impact development or what some of their options might be. Now, for us, it's a bit of a conflict of interest to go onto the property and then make recommendations and then review their credit application later on, and we don't necessarily have the resources for that either. So we've worked with our wonderful partners at Credit Valley Conservation and at Toronto Region Conservation Authority to provide guidance to those property owners. So they have programs where they already go to these types of property owners and provide very tailored information. So we often refer them to these existing programs. And for us, it's been a very natural partnership and worked very well. Different municipalities, some of them might have conservation authorities or some might have relationships with other organizations that have these types of programs. So I would say it's very worthwhile to look at what is already existing rather than to recreate a wheel that you probably don't need and that you might not be able to carry out anyway. So just to sum up then, for us our stormwater charge has really been transformative in that it has provided dedicated funding for our stormwater system, our projects, our maintenance and operational needs, and has really allowed us to plan many decades into the future in a way that we couldn't possibly do before. When implementing a stormwater charge, you really want to, both in the structure of it, but also how you communicate it, focus on transparency, focus on the elements of fairness that it will introduce to how stormwater management is paid for, and definitely find ways, whether they are financial or otherwise, to recognize when best practices are implemented. This really can create a great opportunity to open up dialogue with property owners, residents, and business owners in your municipality that you might not have normally been able to do. And not only can help you as a municipality to fund your stormwater system, but can also help to introduce information and actions to these different property owners that can help them on their own property as well. So that about sums up. I know we'll have time for questions afterwards. Here's my contact information as well if anybody wants to contact me later. Please definitely consider following us on our Instagram page at Saga Stormwater. And you can also look on our website, www.stormwatercharge.ca, for further information as well.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It's such a great case study, and I'm going to leave this page up just for a few more seconds so people have the chance to write that down. I would highly recommend that people take a look at the online charge estimator because it's really quite interesting to see how that works and how charges are calculated. So just a quick reminder that we will have a question and answer period at the end, but participants, please feel free to text your question into the chat. I'm gathering them throughout the webinar, and then I'll be asking them to the speakers afterwards. So don't hesitate. Please feel free whenever you have the chance to text a quick question into the text box. Cindy, are you still there?
I am still here.
Great. So I'm turning.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, and I think everyone else can too. So you're just going to have to speak up a little bit. Can you say a quick hello again?
Okay, hello. Good afternoon, everybody.
That's fantastic. And I've turned over the floor to you, so we are ready to go.
Very good. I am very happy to participate in this afternoon's webinar and bring you some background and information on the town's pilot participation in the Municipal Natural Asset Initiative. This relates to looking at more effective financing and asset management strategies, particularly focusing on the above ground or major system. So with that, I'll just dive right in, giving you a little bit of context. And the town is a rapidly growing area. We have, as of 2016, basically 194,000 population, but we've just currently updated that number, and we're hitting over 200,000 now. In our growth areas, there is a focus on North Oakville, and these are more planned communities with more stormwater management requirements attached to any development. We cover a really wide area. We have very high interest on the part of our community in green spaces, trees, trails, parks, with a really high 93% satisfaction rating on those features. However, we're not sure that our community fully understands the full service function of those green spaces. And part of this work is staff getting a full understanding of those service functions related to stormwater by assessing the value of the natural assets in terms of stormwater management. We are, have to remember to move on.
Can you just speak up a bit more, Cindy? Sorry about that.
Okay, yes. Is that okay?
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay. Our interest was piqued in February of 2016 when we attended the FCM Sustainable Cities Conference in Ottawa, and staff attended, but also our mayor and several councillors. And they sat in on a session where Roy Brooks, who was leading the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative, introduced the idea of a set of pilot municipalities to see what was involved in asset management and stormwater management, and how those natural assets that deliver stormwater management services can be valued and better logged in connected to asset management inventories. So we looked at a potential project that was focused on stormwater assets in the old area of town. We had work underway already in a stormwater management master plan, and we had specific considerations that we're feeling some of those pressures in a certain area of town with less developed stormwater management features, where we have remnant water courses both in the public and the private realm that were under and feeling development pressures. So with that introduction of a potential move to a pilot, we looked at what it could bring to Oakville, what it could help us with in terms of providing information, and we looked at it as an opportunity with the potential to address some of the threats and vulnerabilities that we had been identified in our development and in our climate change planning and in our stormwater management. The one key feature is we knew that there were some gaps in terms of how we looked at our natural assets and how we valued the service that they provided in the context of the major and minor systems. I'll get into the major and minor systems as well, but very briefly in a couple of slides on. Also knew that we had the impact of growth. We're rapidly growing, as I mentioned earlier, but we also have pressures in areas with less well-developed stormwater management features. We call that redevelopment, and we have a fair amount of infill and transition from smaller homes on bigger lots to big homes on same size lots, and therefore losing a lot of that permeability that we have enjoyed in the past in some of those older areas. We'd also flag through our climate change vulnerability assessments and the development of our climate change action plan that the highest resources within the town that were going to feel impacts of climate change were our urban forests and our stormwater systems. And that raised the potential opportunities in participating in the science, in the study with staff. And we already understood that we did have support from the political side of things, which relates to the need to have champions that Victoria mentioned in her presentation. So we also understood, and we had growing staff awareness as we considered the pilot about the hierarchy and the benefits of different stormwater features. And we looked at the opportunities with our natural systems, moving from swales and ditches to natural channels and remnant channels, to our rivers and creeks and even engineered channels, to understand the potential importance to our major stormwater management system. And a key piece that I'll focus on and thread, this will thread its way through the presentation, is a focus on remnant channels, but now we're also broadening that out to understanding that we would consider ditches and swales within this context as well. Again, part of what we're trying to do through our pilot, building on initial presentations to council, taking them through Stormwater 101. As Victoria also mentioned, it's really, the communication is really important. The understanding that you really need to build awareness on the part of council and community on the value of your stormwater management system and its different components. So we really are starting to go back to basics. And this is a graphic that now we're repeating when we're taking reports into council and presentations out to the community to get and build a basic understanding of what we mean when we say major and minor systems. And I think that really brings forward the point that the need to build in communications and an understanding that so many of the people who need to understand that work needs to be done to improve and protect our stormwater systems don't understand what they do for them. So it's incumbent upon us to explain that to them in language that they understand. We also need to explain to people on the community and council just where our vulnerabilities lie. In the top part of that slide, the newer areas and developing areas of Oakville have wet ponds, they've got identified future ponds, they have sizing that matches very high level of storm control. In the middle of Oakville, we have some stormwater systems that have been installed and thought through at a higher level. And then you've got the lakefront area, which is the bottom part of the slide, which really has very, very little of a designed major system, very few ponds, either wet or dry. And we really feel the effects of infill and redevelopment in that south area where there is no formal major system design. So we had already been involved on the staff level in our stormwater master plan phase 2. And this was building from a model of both minor sewer systems and major overland systems, identifying vulnerabilities in those systems, as far as building in all the topographical lay of the land information, and understanding where we were going to have issues, where you've got public stormwater flow moving through private lands and vice versa. And within that stormwater master plan, we actually slowed that plan down somewhat to integrate the municipal natural assets information into the that Phase 2 program. Now, also part of taking some of our stormwater education into council, we had a very interesting slide that we also keep bringing in, that in our north area, which is the photo to the right side, we have a 64% impervious design within that lot coverage, and the stormwater systems attached to those developments are incorporate stormwater from that level of impervious. But what we're seeing, as shown on the left-hand side, is the amount of imperviousness that comes with bigger lot coverage, and we have had much lower lot coverage, so that there's a level of impervious of, you know, maybe even 20%, moving from a 47%, and then with ancillary features, we are moving to even higher than the north area that has designed stormwater systems to take a high level of impervious. So we're looking at 67% plus impervious in our redeveloped areas with very little major stormwater system in place. So when we looked at the option to move into the Municipal Natural Capital Initiative pilot, we really needed to think through and scope the work that we were doing. We really appreciated the framework that was attached to this pilot, and we really like a milestone process that would allow the town to move through with 5 other municipalities, looking at different stormwater concerns and how you could value the natural assets attached to those stormwater concerns and understand what they're bringing to the table, so to speak. Now, this was a bit of a process, so we submitted a letter of interest, and that was evaluated, and then we were approved through the project, and the team includes the Brooks and Associates David Suzuki Foundation in Ontario. It included Friends of the Greenbelt Foundation, as well as Sustainable Prosperity and the Town of Gibsons, BC, as a pioneer in the natural asset valuation process. So the other pilots included the region of Peel and Credit Valley Conservation Authority as one pilot, in another pilot in Ontario, the City of Nanaimo, District of West Vancouver, and the City of Grand Forks. And that's something that was of great interest as we moved through each of our pilots. We all brought different learnings into our to the table, and we all followed slightly different project management and organization within our teams. It is also nice to have a process to follow, and this relates to the steps, running through the milestones and having regular milestone meetings with all of the other pilots. And it really establishes that framework to move through, and gives you targets and deadlines, and obviously a lot of us are pressure prompted, and I think the deadlines help in setting them to move through with the other municipalities across Canada. So our pilot objectives, as we moved into the pilot, we started to really work on scope. We definitely knew that we wanted to tackle some issues, and in order to do this, we had to really think through what we wanted to accomplish. And so we wanted to establish the financial value for those stormwater services provided by those municipal natural assets and what it would cost to replace those natural assets for the water quality and quantity control that were provided. And we would compare that to the engineered assets that could replace, say, the remnant stream that we were focusing on. We wanted to determine that value of loss and that we would experience if we converted those remnant channels to pipes. And we wanted to understand what kind of potential financial risk or liability we would attract. We also wanted to understand how we could expand out from the pilot area in order to manage the potential change pressures in other areas of town. We also wanted to look at how we could stress the existing system by dropping more intensification and more climate variability influences over a study area. And we really wanted to come up with a dollar figure in terms of that that natural asset and the value of that natural asset in providing stormwater management service. So we picked an area and we looked at a couple of candidate sites, but this area was chosen because it was in that vulnerable area in South Oakville. It had a whole realm of issues. It had the best feature in this area was a really good 240 plus meter length of remnant channel. And it had open drainage ditches, tree canopies, and open spaces in many forms. And this would let this, the results and the outcomes from this pilot to go into or be translated to other areas in the south of Oakville. The nice feature about this pilot is that it was experiencing those very pressures that we wanted to understand in terms of the impact on stormwater management and the major systems. So we have in the red circled areas I would say monster home development, using the term loosely, and you compare that to some of the other areas, the other homes where you would have a much higher level of permeability. And you can see this very clearly in this type of photo. In the neighborhood, we got very familiar with it, and we could see, and this was a few years ago, but you can, I wouldn't say that the markets are as hot as they were when we were taking these pictures, but the Oakville real estate market continues to be extremely, I won't say hot, it was like really warm now. It's still continuing in terms of the transition from the smaller homes on lots to the much bigger homes on lots in this area of southern Oakville. And again, what was nice in terms of the timing of this pilot was that we were in the Stormwater Master Plan time period where we were building the model. We were out in the field getting field data. So we focused and drilled down in the specific pilot study area to get a lot more information, because we are going at this area with a higher degree of discretization in terms of the data requirements. So we went out, we got very good character assessment done of the remnant channel. We did groundwater and surface water flow measurements. We did specific and very detailed model calibration in this small area. And we looked at the other things that these types of municipal assets, natural assets, bring to stormwater management, and we call them beneficiary considerations. We also were very fortunate because we were building not only on existing town teams that involved our development engineering people, parks people, planning, as well as roads and works operations and environmental policy. We also had our asset managers at the table, and they were running their own teams with similar type of staff composition. And we really had a good number of staff that would take the information and the learnings from the pilot and start to build them into other work, and particularly the asset management work. And I'll go into that in a little more detail later. So we didn't have to create new teams. We just leveraged the teams, the two teams in stormwater and asset management that were already underway. Now, when we looked at the remnant channels, the results told us very clearly that the network provides a very well-defined conveyance function and attenuation, and that the management of and peak flow shaving was really important. We also understood that this type of remnant channel can be looked at in the context of the ditches in the area. Much of this southern area in Oakville has rural cross-section, so there's quite a ditch network. And this information that we found for the remnant channel can be applied to the functioning of ditches in similar types of scenarios with intense rain, existing conditions and intense rainstorms. So what we found was that this 240 meter stretch of remnant channel in both public and private realm provides in the order of $1.24 million for existing conditions to $1.44 million in conditions, representing that municipal service provided to this area. And when you look at that $1.44 million and what that remnant channel would need to be replaced by in gray pipes for storage and conveyance, you start to understand that we need to pay more attention to the value of these natural assets in providing the municipal service, because we are not going to have enough money to put all of our remnant channels underground and provide a $1.24 to $1.44 million worth of service throughout all of southern Oakville. So the other thing that we started to do in conjunction with looking at the hard engineering numbers, the translation of what the municipal natural asset provides in terms of that gray infrastructure replacement, we also looked at the ecosystem benefits, and we did not quantify this and cost it out, but we do know that it provides water quality improvement. We know it improves stream health. We know that the access to green space and community well-being are supported by parks and our green spaces. We also know that it has remnant channels, and even ditches have an ecological function. They have a cooling function. They support broader biodiversity. And we start to bring this forward to council and our staff to understand that an old, potentially to some scraggly looking old, remnant channel has a really huge potential. We can cost out fairly easily the 1.24 to 1.44 to replace that remnant channel with gray infrastructure. But these beneficiary considerations are a bit harder to cost, but they exist nonetheless. So moving into the key outcome summary is that we have a really solid case now that natural system provides a service that goes beyond flow conveyance, and that the stormwater system relies on natural assets for that major or overland conveyance and provides other benefits. We've got a good value and a surprisingly high value for a 240 meter length of remnant channel. And we also have a much better understanding of how we can identify what the costs are to replace natural systems with engineered or gray systems. And that replacing those natural assets with gray systems fails to replicate or provide an equivalent service. and it may introduce risk and negative environmental impacts as well. Those remnant services, those municipal services provided by the remnant channels, and we're saying ditches and swales, really starts to become important when you roll up their level of service across a whole area of town, where you do not have a well-developed major stormwater system in place. And so this is part of, again, that learning and the messaging that we're taking into council now and taking out to the broader community. So just a summary of the keys to success. We really feel that participating as a pilot was important. We're seeing a wider range of academia, consulting firms, NGOs get involved in understanding municipal natural assets, and Green Infrastructure Ontario is leading NGO in Ontario. We also have made local connections with the groups like the Clean Air Partnership, the Greenbelt Foundation. And through the pilots and the next round of pilots, there is a growing body of Canadian expertise. Often you say, well, you know, municipal natural assets don't work in our winter and frozen conditions, but we're starting to understand that they do operate on many, many conditions, and just it's a matter of understanding how the service level changes in those with the seasons. So what we're suggesting in terms of go forward is, if you're going to tackle some understanding of natural assets, you really need to understand your town team and also your political readiness. You try to understand that the stakeholders and beneficiaries, and we have the benefit of having a town teams already together working on stormwater as well as asset management. And we had to do some understanding and realize that this is a change management plan that needed to run alongside the project work and build through communications the understanding of what our natural assets are providing for us. We really had a narrow scope, which I think benefited us incredibly in coming out with next steps. We're very clear on the next steps. These findings are going to be put into the Stormwater Phase 2 that I mentioned was slowed down to make sure that there was integration. We're looking at developing a policy framework to include the natural assets very explicitly. And our asset managers and our assistant director of finance is looking at the ability to connect in the costs required to maintain and operate natural assets, and in terms of better reflecting the value that they provide. So the existing situation right now is that, for instance, an urban tree can only be logged into an asset registry with the replacement value of a small tree. But that tree, as is this would be a small piece of remnant channel, provides a lot more than in the remnant channel case the value of the land. It's the value of the land plus the municipal stormwater management services that need to be registered against that natural asset. And so we had a lot of key points that I just want to leave you with. We had a lot of information coming in to help us in understanding the role of our natural assets, in particular in an area that was really vulnerable from redevelopment. We had a great position to start. We had a consultant already on board doing our stormwater master plan, and a clear understanding along the way over the last year and a half that natural assets are not only to be highly valued, they're really critical in terms of being a part of the stormwater system, and as such really need to be registered in as assets within our asset management system. And with that, I will leave you with my contact number and be ready to take any questions for any details that you might be interested in hearing about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I'm going to leave this page up here to give some folks a chance to write down that info. And it looks like we have about 15-ish minutes for questions. So what I'll do is I think I'll jump right in to some of the questions that were meant for Victoria. Victoria, are you still on the line?
I am.
Great. So the first question relates to mapping the footprint for the stormwater fee. So the question is, did you have to map the footprint for the stormwater fee manually, or did you have a program that mapped it for you? So maybe you could speak a bit more to the calculations that were done. Were they done manually or not?
Sure. So every property is reviewed and mapped manually. So this takes quite a bit of time, as you can imagine. It took us, to give you some context, we have just over 144,000 properties in Mississauga, and it took us between about a year and a half to 2 years to map all the properties. Now, like I mentioned, some of these already had their rooftops mapped, particularly the residential properties, but because we were looking at total rooftop area, all of these properties had to be looked at again to make sure that we got any outbuildings as well. And of course, all the non-residential and multi-residential properties had to be mapped newly. So we have a pretty good set of data right now. It takes us now about a year to review all of the different zones of the city and remap them. Not all of them have to necessarily be like remapped now because there are not many changes. We do get, our geomatics team gets notifications when, say, a demolition permit or a building permit has been taken out on a property, so they know that there might be some kind of change there. Or if, say, property boundaries change, maybe there's a redevelopment going on. So they'll prioritize those properties to be reviewed. But yes, it's ultimately done manually, and it is pretty time consuming.
Great, thank you for that so much. And again, I encourage people to go take a look at the online stormwater charge estimator. Even just typing in a postal code or an address is actually really fascinating. It's really cool to see like the actual geography of it and how that relates to the charge. Another question for you, Victoria. Did you need council approval to implement the fee?
Oh, absolutely. We actually sought out and received council approval at various different stages. Our very first stage was to commission a financing study done by a consultant to look at what our options were for funding our stormwater system. So whether that it would be a special levy, whether it would be a stormwater charge, whether it would be continuous property taxes, what would our options be. So that was received by and presented to council, and at that point we got the go-ahead from council to look into a stormwater charge. And then obviously we also needed council approval to for our stormwater charge bylaw and the associated policies as well, which brought it into being. We also needed and received council approval for other sort of sub-programs, so which types of properties would be covered by subsidies. That was in accordance with the wishes of council. Our enhanced outreach program, which included the home visit pilot program, that was also approved by council as well too. So definitely there were a lot of moments where we touched base with council for informational purposes, but also for their approval for different parts of the stormwater charge and ultimately for the stormwater charge itself.
So to add on to that answer, we hear a lot from our clients that getting council buy-in can be quite difficult, especially for more innovative or, projects that are not as well known. And so I have a question for both of you. Do you have any tips or lessons learned related to getting either an early council buy-in or a really strong council buy-in?
Well, for us, I would say that one of the factors that was extremely beneficial for us was that we were not the first municipality in Ontario to implement a stormwater charge. Part of the reason I think that we received council buy-in was our mayor at the time, Mayor Hazel McCallion, saw what Kitchener-Waterloo had been doing and became a pretty significant advocate for something similar in Mississauga. So being able to look at other municipalities who have walked that path already and the benefits that they were receiving because they had been those early adopters was really helpful for us. And I think just keeping your council in the loop, really a very significant council education effort was done by staff so that not just so council understood, but also so that they had easy talking points that they could reach for when their residents were coming to them to say, well, you know, what is a stormwater charge? You know, is it just a rain tax? They had answers ready that were provided to them. So just to make it as easy as possible for your council to get on side.
Great, thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Cindy, do you have something to add to that?
Yes, and we really didn't have any idea about the municipal natural assets pilot opportunity before the FCM Sustainable Communities Conference in February 2016, and I was attending with another staff, as well as our mayor and several councillors. And the interesting thing from that is that one of my staff, Tricia Henderson, came back with this idea that, wow, let's look at this. And oftentimes we have lots of great ideas, but we have to watch our resources. But when the same idea came back through our mayor and our councillors, through our CAO, and our CAO convened a meeting to ask staff, what can this do for us? How can we leverage this opportunity? Is it the right time? There was really a great meeting of that political and staff understanding that this could the right thing at the right time for us to take this very interesting step. And we were able to move forward without going to council because we had the Stormwater Master Plan underway, and the cost attached to doing the the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative really played into carving out some of those stormwater consulting fees and the stormwater project fees to cover the fairly minimal cost to carry out the initiative. And then, as I mentioned, Council has been getting periodic updates on the Stormwater Master Plan, and now what we have done is we've just, as of last night, we went to committee, last week we went to committee, last night we went to Council on a report on the Municipal Natural Asset Initiative, again, reporting outcomes. The level in our council and we have a council very interested in environmental initiatives and continuous improvement and innovation. They were really supportive, and we built into our staff report a lot of learning, a lot of concepts. So this staff report on the Municipal Natural Asset Initiative outcomes that track out to not only stormwater management, but our asset management and policy framework that we're building will lend itself incredibly well to the report that they will be getting in very early 2018 on the Stormwater Master Plan project and the completion and further asset management work. So we're really moving stepwise to build that education, and we had a great opportunity council is very supportive, and staff completely understand now with that data and that approach that integrated well with 2 other projects that were underway, just how we can do this without creating something totally new, but just by including additional considerations within the traditional work of municipalities, which is stormwater management, asset management, bringing in, linking in natural asset valuation matches really well with those other initiatives.
Thank you so much for that. Victoria, there's another question for you here related to revenue generation. So does the Stormwater Charge Program generate extra income beyond just paying for the program? So could extra revenue be used to upgrade other stormwater infrastructure?
So the way we have it organized and structured is, so, you know, as you saw, we bring in more revenue than we previously did through property taxes when we were funded through property taxes. And that goes into a few different directions. We are, part of the reason that we have our rate set at what it is now is that the current rate is sufficient to fund all of our current capital projects, fund our operational needs, and to also put a small, sort of more modest amount into a pipe renewal reserve. We grew out pretty quickly as a municipality within a relatively short period of time. And so a lot of our infrastructure is aging at the same time and will have to be replaced around the same time. So we are building up a pipe renewal reserve so that we can do it in a more orderly fashion as opposed to on an emergency basis. And then it also pays for the stormwater charge administration itself. So revenue-wise, we do bring in more than we previously did. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, yeah. And I have a question for both of you now, maybe a bit more of like a philosophical question, but how would you say that, what is one improvement that could be made now in your current stormwater management system that can make them that much more sustainable, that much more, you know, effectively financed? Is there anything you're kind of working towards? It doesn't have to be necessarily soon, but something that you really feel like could push the envelope, could push it to the next level. And Cindy, would you like to go first?
Sure, and it is really directly related to the pilot that we've just completed. And it is really taking the step to include our natural assets in terms, even down to the ditches. The ditches are on public land, often perceived as private, and they provide an incredible service when you have extreme rainfall, and that is something that we're going to be seeing more and more into our future. And as a municipality, if we do not understand the value of those features related to the municipal stormwater service they provide, we will lose them. And then we are at risk. We are going to attract liability because we had something that worked and delivered a certain degree of control, and we'd be replacing them with gray infrastructure that has a lower degree of control, as well as losing some of the other benefits, the ancillary benefits that I mentioned. And we've not dealt well with that. I've been doing stormwater for, you know, probably going on 30 years now. Well, it is 30 years now. And we really have not understood the need to protect our major systems, and the fact that they're more and more compromised can be addressed if we find a way to get them into our asset inventory, with the proper value attached, because the land value does not represent the service provided. And so through this pilot, we're starting to understand that the existing PSAP accounting system that all municipalities apply doesn't deal well with putting in numbers for replacement value that are beyond a typical replacement cost. And in terms of a tree, it's another small tree. In terms of a remnant channel, it's a little piece of land. Well, both of those natural assets give us much more than that value. So we're really trying to look at this from the asset management perspective, because what gets measured gets input and gets managed and gets accounted for, and then you can account for the management and the maintenance and operation of those features, and you can deal better with the impact of that loss. And so I think that next step in the maturation of our natural asset inventories to account for not only the gray infrastructure, but more of the green infrastructure is going to be a huge step forward.
Mm.